Welcome to the final part in this series of presentations where we've been looking at the big questions of life and the logic of Christianity. Questions that you will probably have pondered, questions that have almost certainly been thrown at you by others. Questions for which easy answers are simply not available. We have to ponder, to think, and look at the evidence. The big questions of life that all we human beings have to face. Does life have a meaning at all, or is it all chance? Is there a right way to live, or is it just a matter of choice? How do we cope with all the problems and sufferings that life so often throws at us? And in the end of the day, does life have any destination at all? How are we going to find answers to these questions? Questions that are yours, that are personal. And I'm suggesting that the logic of Christianity, the insights from Jesus, fit the observed evidence best. They make the greatest sense of ourselves in our world, and they offer a practical way forward to enrich the lives of all of us. And in this series I've tried to look at some of these big issues and to show how the logic of Christianity, what Jesus came to bring and show, makes sense and points us forward. I have stressed throughout, we don't go by assertion and opinion. There's far too much of that in the world today, in the world of religion and in the world of politics, and indeed in life in general. Let's look at the evidence. You can't get proof on many of these questions, and when people say I have proved, they don't really understand it. You get evidence, but we've got to get through and break through the myths that fly around our religious circles and in our cultures and societies, and get at the facts, get at the evidence, and weigh it. From the outset we looked at three sets of laws: the biological world, the physical world, and human nature. But there's a big difference in the biological world and the physical world. These are summaries of just the way the world, and indeed the wider universe, happen to operate. This is the way it has been designed, if you like. But the laws of human nature are something different, because right across all cultures over all time, there's a lot of common ground about people thinking that we should do certain things and we should live this way for the wider benefits of everyone around. But there are different kind of laws and principles. If we look at the physical world, that is certainly true. And the world of the physical sciences particularly, and later the biological sciences, have shown the sheer complexity. But there's also that. Throughout all humanity, there is something of a sense of right and wrong. A lot of common ground across cultures, societies and time, although some diversity. But that sense, that deep sense of right and wrong is there. What does it tell us? I'm suggesting that the simplest and most obvious explanation is that there is a mind behind the universe. A mind of immense complexity and power, but who operates on fixed moral principles. There is evidence, and there's a deduction that interprets the evidence, and it's difficult to interpret it any other way. From all the evidence we saw, a world around, it operates in fixed principles. Does that suggest a mind behind the universe? We have minds, the way we understand the world. Does that suggest something behind it all? The inbuilt sense of right and wrong. Now, there's no obvious evolutionary advantage. How could that have arisen? And does this assumption of a creator mind, a God behind the universe, does that make more sense of what we observed? We human beings, two characteristics: cognition and conscience. We are capable of high-level thought. We are free to think, free to decide. We have a capacity to understand, to interpret. But we've also got this awareness of right and wrong, and an awareness that goes with it, that we don't match up to what's right and wrong. We call that conscience. How do we explain these? We're very different. Why did these things develop? How did they develop? Where have they come from? That suggests that, which fits the evidence of the teaching of Christianity. Humans in some way were given something not possessed by other animals through evolution. We have some sort of divine characteristic. We've evolved physically, yes, but we have some sort of divine characteristic, and that points to there being a God, a creator. The evidence fits. That leads to two very important principles. There is no place for blind faith. Far too much religion is simply blind faith, blind belief, believing in things that contradict the evidence all over the place, believing in things that simply cannot be true. And we hang on to them, often from pressure from society around. Look at the evidence. And if God gave you a mind, use it. Use it to work things out. And our biggest task is to work out why He made us, what He made us for, and to live that way. Two vitally important principles that come out of this cold logic. Most of humanity accept there is some kind of God or gods. A minority reject any idea of this. Usually they put up the reason is because there's far too much evil and injustice in the world. How could there be a good God there? But the very fact that we can know what's right and wrong implies we have some sort of inbuilt standard within us. And that implies that there is a God who made the standard. It's not just arbitrary. Believing that the universe has no meaning can only be checked by us if we have a concept of meaning from the start. There's a logical absurdity in the argument. And that's the logical absurdity of atheism. So why do people cling to it? Not large numbers in the world, but a significant minority cling to this, despite its logical absurdity. Let's look at the other track. You can go down two broad ways. One that separates good and evil quite clearly, one that doesn't. And the first one, God created the universe and it is separate from Him. And the universe is good, but things can go wrong. Somehow God is internal and integrated with the universe, which is much more of an Eastern thought. So we deduce that God made this world, but things have gone wrong. That's the deduction. And that's the logic of Christianity. It makes sense, fits the evidence. But we're left with a strange kind of situation. Atheism is logically absurd. But so is a lot of religion. Diversity of religion. And when you look at some of the belief systems, you shake your head in amazement. They contradict the evidence. Blind faith. Why do people cling to them? Well, that's probably true. We're influenced by upbringing, by those who've got power in our society who manipulate us. There are strong cultural pressures to make us remain within our religious systems. Sometimes it's self-interest, because if you don't belong to the right religion, you could make no progress in that society. There are authority figures. We respond to them. But underneath it all is that. And if you think about it for a moment, that's true. We're scared to step out and use our brains. We're scared to step away from the cultural, social, religious pressures all around us. We're scared to do this. We move into an unknown. So we hang on to things that are completely irrational, often paying lip service to them, because throughout the world most people pay lip service to the religion that's part of their culture. Let's use our brains at the logic of things. When we came to Jesus, there are those who try to reduce him to these things. Look at the teaching of Jesus. No good teacher could ever have said or made the claims he did. He didn't found a religion. Look at the history. Look at what he taught. You see, these are ways of dismissing Jesus and putting him in a box. You can't put Jesus in a box. Islam has come up with this glorious picture, relatively modern in fact, calling Jesus a prophet. They have reduced Jesus to a human being. While some think he was a naive idealist who got caught up in the political machinations of his day. Whatever else is true of Jesus, he was not naive. When you look at the evidence, the historical evidence, the confirmed historical evidence, you can only come to these conclusions. He either was who he claimed to be, or he was mad, delusional, or thoroughly evil. We cannot reduce Jesus. We contradict the evidence. So let's look at what he was teaching and saying. A good world that's gone wrong. God entered the human arena in the life of Jesus. If you like, God landed on enemy-occupied territory in the life of Jesus. Things had gone wrong. Now we might expect that to have happened, but there are consequences of Jesus had come that way, because he would have destroyed the very nature that is part of us. We have free will. And he will never use overwhelming force, because that contradicts the way we have been made. So he stated the obvious. He came in the vulnerability of a child and grew up in our world. He taught us, but he showed us. And throughout his life, he confronted the fundamental evil. And in the end of the day, he defeated it. There are the claims that Jesus made. That's the logic of Christianity. Does it fit the evidence? Probably most of humanity would agree on a description something like that. God who made the entire universe, way, way beyond us. We have limited mental capacity, limited spiritual capacity by comparison with him. But that's the greatness of God. Not in overwhelming power, not in ordering us around, not in dictating to us, but he came in humility and entered humanity in the life of a human being known as Jesus. Now we can understand God, because we can understand something of each other. His lifestyle, his behavior, his teaching makes it intelligible to us, makes God known to us. But he lived for others, a self-sacrificial life of love. And that's the picture of God that is in Christianity. And that brings us to the cross and the resurrection of Jesus, because in the accounts of Jesus these take a dominant place. Why are they so important, and what's the evidence for them? Do we have evidence that Jesus was crucified and resurrected? If we have any evidence, what are the implications of that? What's the meaning of these events? They're central in the whole of Christianity. They're central in the documents, and indeed the secular documents of the time. Looking at the cross, we looked at that. And we saw that the evidence that Jesus was executed under torture publicly, that he died and that he was buried, is totally overwhelming. And to deny that that happened simply contradicts the overwhelming evidence. And it brings Islam into disrepute when it tries to deny it, as it does today. Again, a modern teaching. But what about the resurrection? That he came back to life 3 days later? We have evidence from the documents of the time and circumstantial and events evidence all around. We do know that. It's all recorded. He was buried in a cave tomb that had never been used. That's the custom of burial in his day. The tomb had been sealed by a huge stone. It had been moved. The tomb had been guarded, and the guards couldn't explain the events. No human being had done it. They made that clear. In the end of the day, they couldn't find the body. But they knew it was the right tomb, because the grave clothes were there. But hundreds of followers of Jesus afterwards claimed to have met Jesus again. And the central friends of Jesus moved from sheer terror. They thought they'd be next to be executed. And they moved from that terror to confidence. How do we explain all that? We look at other evidence round about. The Jewish people opposed Jesus completely, but they accepted that Jesus had been executed, and they accepted that the followers of Jesus believed he had been resurrected. The authorities, religious and secular, of the day failed to offer any explanation for these events. They could easily have stopped the whole thing stone dead by producing the body. They didn't, because they couldn't. And they observed the growing confidence of the followers of Jesus. So what did they do? They threatened and persecuted them, and indeed some of them lost their lives, to try and suppress it, because they couldn't provide any alternative evidence to undermine it. And it threatened their power base, so they tried to persecute it out of existence. They failed. The claims of Jesus, wherever he confronted wrongdoing, with immense courage he took it on. But that's amazing. There's lots of things that were wrong in the world, but he didn't condemn people. His attitude was always positive, seeking to release people to a better way, and he invited people to join him in that better way. And knowing our limitations and that we can't do it well, he offered the resources to live that better way. That's the claims of Jesus, the logic of Christianity. The cross was central. It assumes that. And the evidence for that is enormously strong. Here is one interpretation. It's not complete, not the whole story, because it does give us a simple track of ideas. God entered our humanity. He identified with human beings, and he came in the life of Jesus. to show us what life could and should be like. And God confronted the evil ruling the world, not by overwhelming force, but by suffering love. And he took on the worst that evil could throw at him. When politics and religious leaders get together, that's the worst kind of evil you ever get in the history of the world. History shows it. They tortured him to death for hours. But he went through that, and in the process of going through it, he robbed death of its power. And he offers us a release from the grip of evil and the fear of death. And he invites us to join him. It's described as in his kingdom, where we join him as God's children, precious to God. And he gives us the power to live the way he lived, if we are only willing to take it. That's the logic of Christianity. That's the meaning of the cross, bringing it together. A wonderful world, but it's gone wrong. We're not able to put it right. God comes into our human arena in the vulnerability of a child, showing us what life should and could be like. But look at the bottom two lines. That's the bit I've added. In allowing himself, because he could have escaped easily, to be publicly tortured to death, he robbed the whole power of death and evil and violence. He robbed it of its power. And he set us free, potentially. And he invites us to share with him in restoring God's good creation. That's the logic of Christianity. Many people have a major problem there. Suffering is all around us, but we have to recognize that most of it is caused by us. Now, some suffering has advantages. We learn from things. That if you put your hand too near a fire, you feel pain, and that probably saves you from allowing your hand to be burnt off. But as we see the evil and the suffering in the world, you find within yourself, rising within you, a desire for something better. You want to do something about it. Why do people behave in these terrible ways? But there's more to it than that. There are destructive illnesses, progressive ones, and the random or apparently random natural disasters. How do we explain these sort of things? What's going on in our world? Why has it gone wrong? This wonderful and remarkable world. It does operate on the fixed principles that the sciences have uncovered. It's underpinned by the laws of probability. That is true. The evidence shows it. Nothing to do with chance. The laws of probability. And when it works within these principles, it works the way it was designed to work. It goes along fine. But if we ignore the principles, if we exploit the principles, if we abuse the planet, and if we exploit each other, then we've got problems. That's part of the explanation. But there's more to it than that. Yes, God made this wonderfully good world. But something has gone wrong. Now, where's the origin of that? And the logic of Christianity, the teaching of Jesus, shows that there are powerful spiritual beings. Can't see them, but they're there, and they're opposing God, and they're attempting to mess up the creation and make our lives miserable. But it can't just have a random go at us all the time. God protects us if we're willing to seek it and accept it. And that's a big if. So natural disasters and major diseases. Perhaps something to do with the way that the spiritual beings are interfering with God's world to try and mess it up. But much of the suffering that we human beings go through is caused by us. So the earthquake I mentioned, where 80,000 were killed, almost all the deaths were caused by those who had put up buildings, and to make money they had flouted building regulations, and they could not stand an earthquake. And that goes on if you look at most of these things. So there are multiple reasons behind the suffering, multiple interpretations. It all makes sense. But fundamentally, imagine that. If there were no disasters, no illness, no diseases, no terrible things, where God protected everyone all the time, what would happen? What are the implications of that kind of world? Well, we'd be puppets then. Free will would no longer be a reality. And imagine if we had the free will, what we might do. We might perpetrate the most horrendous evils on each other, knowing that God will step in and protect everybody. Gives us a license for the most terrible things. If God just stepped in every natural disaster, life would not be the way it is. The world would not be the way it is. Our created universe has a measure of freedom. The spiritual beings have a measure of freedom. We have freedom, genuine free will. And all these supposed natural disasters, they're just part of the way our world operates, and is designed for our benefit if we live within them and work within them. And most of the problems are caused by us. But there are things that are inexplicable. There are things that horrendous disasters that make us wring our hands in despair almost. And we have to remember that there are evil spiritual beings that are at work, trying to disturb God's good created order. Suffering? Yes, we have these natural disasters. There is illness and disease. We often create problems by abusing our bodies. We don't share the resources so that many don't have enough. And we do terrible things to each other. Much of the suffering is caused by humans, by our selfishness and our greed. Much of it is caused by the fact that we do not live within the physical principles in which this world has been designed. That if you build houses in floodplains, you're liable to get flooded out at some stage. But there also are evil forces in the world that are seeking to cause problems and create some of the apparently irrational tragedies that do occur from time to time. That's true. We have the capacity to deal with a lot of it. We cause a large number of the problems through our selfishness and our greed and the way we exploit, do not share the resources, and are taking things for ourselves. Can't blame God for that. There are inbuilt principles, both in the physical and spiritual realms. We have to live within these principles. We're designed to do it. And we live within the spiritual principles. We're given enormous freedoms. It's genuine free will. And if you've got free will, there are inevitable consequences. God, as an act of love, gave us free will, but that means He took a risk. There is the risk that things can go wrong. Any parent knows that bringing up children. They have free will. They can do things that can hurt themselves, hurt others, or cause troubles into the world around. And the parent has to guide them lovingly, but they have to learn from their experiences of life to control their free will and live within the principles of the physical, spiritual, and moral world. That's the way our world has been created. Behind all of us There are religious and political philosophies. Philosophies of life, if you think. Sounds very posh and very deep, but it's just ways of thinking that govern our attitudes towards everything in the world around. They are very different. There's the naive statement that you can believe anything you like as long as you're sincere. Doesn't matter what you believe, people say, as long as you're sincere. That contradicts the evidence, because beliefs lead to behavior, and I showed a few of them. There are consequences, and you can see it in Iran today, the consequences of what Ayatollah Khomeini has set up. The disasters of the Soviet Union of the past. The disasters of Western Europe caused by Hitler. And the problems in the Islamic world today, where retaliation is a way of life. Get the boot in first. And that's contradicted, every one of them, by the words of Jesus. That was his life direction. Can you do that? Can I do that? No. We can only do it when we've been given the spiritual resources from him to make it possible. Beliefs do matter. Your broad philosophy and way of looking at life, it does matter, because it influences what you do, how you behave, and that can have huge impacts on those around you all the time. There's a cold logic to this. Religion, I'm talking about all religion, is essentially selfish, because it looks at that. The goal is to get to a good place in the next life. Or if it's an Eastern religion, be absorbed into deity. Be reincarnated back to a higher level. That's selfish. To do that, you get rules. We claim these rules are given by God, God's law, but in fact the rules that are laid down by human beings in our attempts to please God and impress him so that we can get our meal ticket to the next stage. And it produces a negative life. What kind of God would make us so that we've got restrictions all the time, and if you step out of line the religious police will jump on you? God made a good world, and if that is true, it's all good. There's a cold logic to that. And if you look at the rules that religions have, not only do they contradict each other, but most of them are just completely irrational. Look at them. You've been brought up with them, perhaps. Look at them in the cold light of day and just say, why? You don't get rules in Christianity as presented by Jesus. Because Jesus presented that, revolutionary in his day, that there is a God who made the universe and who wants the best for you and for me. That's his agenda. And he offers life quality now, not in some mysterious hereafter. And the quality, the evidence that we're living quality lives is we treat each other well. We seek the best for the other. And if we all did that, what a wonderful world it would be. That gives you purpose, fulfillment and satisfaction at the deepest level. He clearly, overtly, precisely rejected that. It was the way of the culture of his day. It still is in religion today. He threw it out in no uncertain terms. But he offered a model of quality living. But he knows we can't do it of ourselves, so he provides the resources to make it possible. That's the logic of Christianity. That's the way of Jesus. Does it fit the evidence? That's certainly true. It's no longer restrictive. Do this, don't do that, do the other. Wear this, don't eat that. These kind of rules have gone. But it changes the way we look at what we've got. Changes the way we spend our time and our energy. Because now we're working for the agenda for the benefit of others. It changes how we see each other. Forgiveness replaces condemnation. That's a different way of looking at things. We're no longer judgmental. Changes the way we treat each other. Jesus spoke of love. our agenda being the best for the other. Not retaliation, not getting the boot in first, not giving us a superior position. Changes the way we relate to each other in the closest relationship of all. The word security is the key there. We're not abusing somebody else, even somebody else who's willing at the time. And it gives an attitude towards the future of quiet confidence. It's in God's hands. He's on our side. He'll look after us. He'll take us through. And all of this is a counterculture. Runs against the societies of today. I have suggested that, and this has been a very rapid summary in this presentation. Then I've extended it to that. And I ask you to ponder it. Don't look at religion. Don't look at religious organizations. Look at Jesus. You'll find the stories in the New Testament. You find the evidence from history, archaeology, life, yourself. The insights that Jesus came to bring fit the observed evidence best. They make the greatest sense of ourselves in our world. Don't suspend your mental faculties. There is no place for blind belief. There is no place for believing something because you're told to believe it. That's manipulation. Look at the evidence. And then look at the evidence. Because the evidence suggests that the way of Jesus offers a practical way forward to enrich the lives of all humanity. That's the logic of Christianity. Look at the evidence, weigh the evidence, and come to your own conclusions. The logic of Christianity.